over to you to be able to give us a bit of a window into your journey.
Great. Thank you, Sandeep. First of all, I am thrilled to be here. When I met Sandeep and the team, I like being around people who believe the world can change and the world can be better for kids. So it's infectious, and I am just thrilled to be here. I'm going to try to share for about 10 minutes a little bit about my experience and lessons learned. And my hope is that even though the United States context is quite different than India, that some of the common, like at the fundamental place, it's actually useful to you. So I'm going to share my screen here, and let's see. All right, is there a little presentation up? Good, okay. Excuse me. All right, so first of all, I'm Scott Gordon. I have 2 children. I was the founder for Mastery for 22 years. I live in Philadelphia. Mastery has, as Amina said, just under 15,000 students, and we're in Philadelphia and the surrounding areas. Philadelphia is about 150 kilometers south of New York, so we're on the East Coast, and an old city for the United States. Philadelphia is about 300 years old, so a little different than most American cities. In our context, a turnaround school means the government, which is the school district, selects the schools that are the lowest performing, and often, unfortunately, in the United States, the most dangerous, where there's many fights, where there's chaos, and students are not learning. And that's typically evaluated based on reading and math scores. It's also a place where there's many students with disabilities. A turnaround means that a new organization, in this case, Mastery, takes over the management. And in some cases, we can hire new teachers, replace the teachers. In other cases, we don't replace the teachers. So we've done it both ways. So just to give you some sort of sense that it is possible, this graph shows what first reading scores were before Mastery took over. Those are the bars in orange. And then after Mastery took over, those are the bars in blue. And in general, the longer that we've had a school, the higher the rate of achievement. And this is the same for math. So we've been able to take schools that have been not performing for 20, 30 years and begin creating a different culture and a different environment. Enrollment, parents have responded to about 1/3. Our enrollment went up by about 5,000 students. So these are schools where parents did not want to go, and now parents are coming back. So we're thrilled about that and creating a real community. All right, so how does it work? Turnaround schools, as Sandeep have said, unfortunately, historically have not been successful. It's very rare. What have we been able to do to create some success? And I want to stay up here, not get into details, but I'm happy to answer lots of detailed questions. So there's really 2 things I believe at the heart of what can make a school successful. So first is what the adults and kids believe in, which creates the culture, and then management systems. So let's talk about belief first. So this is in the American context, but perhaps it's similar in India. The lowest performing schools are often not just low performing because bad luck or because there's not good teachers. It's because of a long history. These schools have been underperforming. They're in the highest poverty communities. In the United States, they're often serving Black children, Spanish-speaking children, or immigrants. So there's a long history of racism where those schools were not invested in. So they're also the poorest buildings, where the buildings aren't in good repair, books are old, things like this. And this was a system that has been in place for many, many years. Unfortunately, in our setting, that history has created a culture where the expectation of the adults, of educators, is that, of course, these schools won't be successful because these are poor kids, or because these are Black kids, or because these are Hispanic kids. And so there's not an expectation or really a belief that it can be different, because it's always been this way, always will be this way. So I would say at the very first step to turn around schools, someone needs to believe that this is not okay, and that in fact it is possible to change these schools, because we believe fundamentally in the capacity of our students. We believe that poverty, not the right books, are obstacles, but it is not destiny. And while if you go to conferences or talk about turnaround schools, we're going to talk about the technical things, to me, the biggest problem is that the adults don't believe in children. So how does one create a culture where you believe that students can be successful? So first, you have to have a leader or a system leader or the principal who believes with their heart and soul that success is possible for kids. If you don't have that, game over. You will not have success. Even if you have the best technology, the best books, the highest paid teachers, if there's not a fundamental, like a leader's creating a culture that believes in kids, is not successful. And that is, unfortunately, I think something you have to find that person. It's hard to develop that person with those beliefs because they're so deep inside one's heart. But we need to find those folks. Then there's a few things that leader needs to do. First of all, define what success is. If success is reading or math scores, there needs to be a way to measure it. If it's getting into a high quality college or high school, then you need to measure that and keep coming back to that. It needs to be a clear mission and set of values that this is what we believe and this is why we are here. That leader then needs to create an adult culture, even for teachers who don't believe, needs to create a culture that is based in belief. And there's a number of ways to do that. Obviously, coming back to the mission and the values, but doing lots of little things like celebrating successes, lifting up those, even if you have one teacher who believes, having that teacher present to their peers, creating like rituals where you meet and discuss the injustice that is occurring to your kids and the opportunity for you to change that. You have to create a movement that this community of adults can change the world. It's a hard thing to do, but it's possible, so that folks who don't believe, it's not okay to talk about it. It's not okay to express that, because the culture of belief in students is so strong that the leader created. Then you have to create that as well for students, because students don't believe. Students believe that it is the destiny not to be successful. There's a number of ways to do that. One of them is to just anchor the school in reality, which is that the entire world in the United States, the country, doesn't want you to succeed or doesn't believe in you succeed. But we as a community, together, believing in ourselves, are going to break through that. And we're going to support each other. And then lots of rituals, community meetings, celebrations, highlighting the culture of your kids and the families, celebrating the families and the perseverance and persistence of your children and families. You nurture a culture where everyone believes that the impossible is possible. That is, if you will, the foundation. On top of that foundation, you actually need to manage the schools. I don't know if this is the case in India, but in the United States, there's again, a culture that running schools is that a good school is based on magic, that somehow you find the magical teachers and you don't give those teachers feedback and you don't tell people what to do as the leader. You like let it grow like trees, and somehow magically you create a school. It is nonsense. It's just not true. To run a great organization, you need management and systems, and the leaders need to be able to tell the people who work there what's expected, what to do, how to do it. The leaders need to be the teachers of the teachers and the culture. I want to talk about just a few systems that I think are elemental, and then we'll stop. So first thing is, if you're going to define success, you need to have a common assessment, a way to do that. If it's reading, you need to have a common way to measure reading growth that you constantly come back to. Like, you need to have reality and truth be like at the center of your culture, and having common assessments allows you to do that. Second is, you need to describe and define what great instruction is. There's lots of instructional standards. You need to have the standards. You can borrow one. There's books out there. I'm happy to talk to you about resources, but you need to describe, this is what I expect in the classroom every day. And then you need to observe it. You need to train it, right? You are constantly investing in your teachers to get to this vision of what you believe great instruction is. And you're observing teachers. You're giving them feedback. You can have peers observe each other, give you feedback. You create a culture where teachers believe, I'm here to become the best teacher I can be, to become a master craftsman of this thing called teaching. A lot of ways to do it, not easy, it's a journey. But teachers love that, because somewhere in their hearts, they chose to become a teacher because they wanted to change the world, they wanted to invest in kids, and they want to be, everyone wants to be good at their work. You need to have common curricula so that you can train people how to use it. And the instruction, the vision of instruction. So whether that's technology-based or an old sort of set of curricula, in some ways it's not so important. There's better curricula and worse curricula. The most important thing is that you are all operating from the same page. Finally, some systems where you're actually finding out where your kids are at. Are they learning to read? Who is, who isn't? Where are they struggling? And using that data, giving that to teachers so they can act on that data. So your school is a constant system where you keep going back to, our kids learning, how do we address it, coming back, celebrating successes. The last thing I would say, there's so much more to this. It is, in my experience, really, really hard. If you're on this call, you must be a little bit crazy, because you believe you can change the world. You can believe you can do things that are hard. And to me, that's the only way to live. It is what makes like your work meaningful and purposeful. And inside, to keep yourself sustained, there needs to be a humility that this is a great mountain we're climbing, but every step has value and is worth it and gives your work meaning and purpose. It ultimately is possible. And I would just say, I just stepped down. I've been Mastery CEO for 22 years. It was the most satisfying, gratifying, and most difficult thing I've ever done. And I hope that in some ways, some folks on this call will be inspired to do this work, because we can't create 1.7 new schools. It's just not possible. And we can't create, 80 million new teachers. We have to work with the teachers we have and do it now. And it is possible. I just want to say thank you again. I'm happy to chat, lots of details. We haven't talked about special education. We haven't talked about school discipline and behavior. We can talk about things like that, or buildings and technology. It's a complex thing to run schools. Happy to talk about that. But at its heart is what we believe about kids and the way we run our schools. This is my personal email, which happy to answer any questions. My dream is one day to visit India, so perhaps one day I'll meet some of you. Sandeep, that is what I have. Hopefully that gets us started.
Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. That was very insightful. I love how do you get everybody to believe that's possible? And how do you start with a leader, then basically get adults to believe, and then get kids to believe, and then create the systems and culture to make sure everybody believes, right? And then couple that with how do you then bring in the management systems to basically make sure that it just runs really well? And so it's belief in a really well managed system. And I love the simplicity of how you brought that together. Thank you for that. Scott, I mean, I've had a couple of questions for you that I'd love just to dive into before we open this up to be able just to dig a little bit deeper into some of what you shared, and I'd love to start off with a little bit of like how mastery works, and in particular, like two questions for you, at what stage do you actually come in and take over a school, right? And how does that process work? And then my second question is like, when you say we take over the management, can you just double click on that for us? Like, what does that mean? Does that mean, when you say you're taking over the management, like help us break that down in terms of what that means?
Yeah, in our context, the school district, this is when primarily President Obama was in office. There was a national focus on not accepting low-performing schools for poor children. And there were incentives for school districts to turn around and do radical things. One of the radical things was to take a school district and turn it over to a charter organization. We're a nonprofit, but we don't report to a government-run school board. So the school district identified the schools, had a community process to pick who would run the school, and then we would run the school. The teachers who were there had the opportunity to stay with us. Most did not. They chose not to, but they could. In other cases, there were charter schools that have been struggling only for perhaps 4 years or 5 years, not for 20 or 30 years. And in that case, the board of that organization, also a nonprofit, turned the organization over to Mastery. The management, to double click on the management, in the United States, there's government tests that kids need to take every year. We still have to do that. There's also rules to accept every child, to serve students with disabilities, whether that's a disability where a student is blind, a student has emotional issues and is misbehaving, a student is struggling with reading, we call it special education. So we have to serve those students. We have regional centers for some of those students, but we have the opportunity to train our own teachers, to pick our own curriculum, and to set the culture rules and behavior rules of the school.
Got it.
So just, we would get notified that we had the school in perhaps May. We would meet with the existing teachers, try to tell them to come join us. And then in the summer, we would run lots of training, sometimes typically 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We would paint the building, try to fix the toilets that didn't flush or lights didn't go on if we could, brought new books if we could, and began opening the school, but with just different adults in the building.
Got it. Got it. So that's helpful. So basically, there's a process to be able to help come in, like you come in, you take over the school, you bring in your own school leader, you find a school leader, and then you basically give the teachers the autonomy to either stay or leave, but you try to basically have a meeting to be able to see if people would like to stay, correct?
That's correct, yes. On almost every occasion, we believe except one, we changed the school leader. That was really key. In one case, we had a school leader who believed and just had never been trained how to run a school. Again, in the United States, and I'm guessing it's similar in India, the training for teachers is poor and doesn't really address what to do in the classroom. And the training for school leaders is horrible and doesn't really teach school leaders how to run a building, how to be a leader.
Yeah, very, very true. And I think very similar context there. And, if you wouldn't have had autonomy over being able to bring in your own school leader, or autonomy over like teaching staff, and like you couldn't actually let go of teaching staff, like, you had to basically work with an existing school leader. Do you feel like the formula that you found a lot of success with would have worked, and why or why not?
If we could not replace the school leader, it would not have worked.
Yeah.
If we could have not replaced for the teachers, it would work, but slower.
Yeah.
If teachers and the school leader don't hold students to high expectations, if they don't push kids to do things that they believe themselves is not possible, then nothing happens. I don't care how great your technology is, you're not going to get great change. Teachers can change. It's difficult. It's easier to start with new teachers that you train yourselves and believe. But most, in my experience, certainly there's some teachers who don't care, but most teachers in their heart care, but they've been in a culture that it was almost impossible to care, because there's so many things that were sending the signal of like, it's not going to matter. You're not going to be successful. Kids are going to misbehave. Parents are not going to care. Like, kids won't learn. You're going to work hard and no one's going to recognize you. And then that becomes who they are. That can change, but it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I resonate with that so deeply, right? Like, it really starts so deeply at levels of belief and what people expect from kids, you know? I remember, like, I was in the US at the very beginning of Obama's race to the top, and I moved to India shortly after that was rolled out. And I remember one of the conditions for basically turning around schools was actually basically replacing a percentage of your staff, right? That was actually one of the starting ingredients. I think it was 25%. Or I'm guessing the rationale for that, if I had to infer by what you're saying, is that actually gives you a critical mass to be able to basically institute a new culture. Is that
Exactly.
accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Got it.
Exactly. I recognize that's not always possible.
Yeah.
And there's a whole politics side to this. If you're disrupting the government system or the union system, you're going to have a fight on your hands.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple.
Yeah. So I guess, like, a follow-up question, right, is like, you mentioned about how it's really hard, right? Both of us know and have talked about how, like, most cases don't succeed, like, it is rare. And I guess, like, what makes it so tough? Like, as somebody who's been in it for 22 years, you mentioned poverty, right? And like, but double click on that for us, right? Like, what makes it actually so tough to go in and actually turn around a failing school successfully?
Yeah, I'll answer first, like, from the heart, and then,
Yeah, please.
like, technically. I'm assuming people got on this call because you believe that the world can be a better place for kids in India, that there's an injustice that has to be addressed, or a wrong that has to be righted, and that there's a long, long history and systems that have created this reality. So at its heart, it's hard because you are pushing against history, pushing against systems. You're changing the trajectory of your country, of your society. And that's a radical act. Again, to me, the most beautiful act and the most important thing one can do. We all have to work to be able to do this work is such a privilege, because you in your everyday get to change the world. But it's not easy to change the world. And then I would say, like, on a more, like, not superficial, but just reality is, because there are no systems, and you have to create those systems, right? You have to create the instructional standards, the teacher observation, the common assessment, the behavior protocols, the way you're going to address a student who has a learning disability. You have to create all that and have the energy to do all that, and constantly send the message to the teachers and to the students that it is possible, when everything around you is telling you it's going to fail, because everything, it has always failed. So that's hard for the leader, like, in their heart, to be, like, humble that it's going to be hard and you may only make this much progress, not this much progress, while working your butt off to build these systems. I would say another thing, Sandeep, which I'm so thrilled to meet you and your organization, is having a community of people that believe what you believe, that are working and rowing in the same direction, is just absolutely necessary, because it can be very lonely. And you feel you're the only person doing this kind of work. And why not do something else? And your other friends are out making a lot of money or doing other things. So having a community is critical.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, we talk about belief a lot, right? But I think we oftentimes like, you know, we kind of sign it off as like the wishy-washy soft stuff, right? But it's like, it's funny just how pivotal it is for change, right? Because like by and large, people don't believe, right? And like that's not, it is hard to be able to basically change what people believe, and for people to actually believe that kids, regardless of their background, like regardless of their socioeconomic state, can achieve anything, right? And can accomplish anything. And so how do you actually like change an entire culture to be able to basically believe something fundamentally different is possible for kids, you know? And that's not soft wishy-washy stuff. Like that's real. And that's at the heart of this work. And I love that, Scott. Um,
Yeah, I would just say one thing that makes it easier. You know, I've met with people who work in the private sector who are turning around companies, and there's some real similarities. It's typically, culture and
say what those
systems.
are.
Well, culture, the culture of the adults
Yeah.
and the management systems. But the one thing that we have as educators that they don't have is the calling. You know, like and this may sound like not what you expected, but you know, I was born after World War II. Like I didn't have the opportunity to fight, against Nazism. I didn't have I was born after in the United States, the civil rights um, movement, where people were killed, um, but I have the opportunity to do this now. And the same, I'm sure, for you. There's, heroes in Indian history, and you were born after those heroes, but you have the opportunity to do this in this moment, and to fight this fight as part of your job, and you're not in risk of being like thrown in jail or whatever. And so it's a tremendous privilege also that is unique to this work.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a real privilege, and to keep reminding ourselves that it's a real privilege to be able to wake up every morning and to say like, well, I'm actually fighting the fight that feels like it needs to be fought, you know?
Yep.
Yeah. And how do we keep reminding ourselves of that even in the face of deep challenge? Um, Scott, I mean, I'm gonna take us in a different direction, folks. I'm gonna ask about 5 more minutes of questions, and then we're gonna open this up to people here. Yeah. So um I'm gonna give you some options, right? And I'm gonna give you some options that, I've heard a little bit of you say, but also are frequently tried, across the board. And I'd love for you to say, out of these like 6 options that I put down, like if you had to pick 2 that you think are like most critical to being able to actually elicit a successful turnaround, like which of these 2 would you pick, right? And I'm going to be direct in how I frame these options, right? Because I just, for the sake of like just direct this. And so one of those is, you could replace the principal, right? 2 is you could replace the teacher. 3 is you could actually replace the students, which is something that we hear often, right? If you can just get a new cadre of students in, like the school would actually be a fundamentally different place, right? 4 is you could just better train your teachers. 5 is maybe you could better train your principal. And 6 is you could actually just invest heavily into coaching and mentoring teachers, and what I gathered as what you shared is actually at the heart of all of this, like is actually just changing belief systems. And if you had to think about which of these actually you think would most work in your success and would lead to like higher belief levels, but also stronger levels of management systems, like what have you found the most out of these 6?
Yeah, Sandy, you won't be surprised. It would be to change the principal would be number one. And number 2 would be to change the teachers or the way we train the teachers, if that's not possible.
Yeah.
Again, I want to make sure I honor the challenges of creating management systems. Like, not easy. by the way, anything we have, we can share at Mastery, and there's lots of great institutions that you can borrow things. Don't invent things. Take them from other people, because it's not the thing, it's how you implement the system.
Yeah.
But it's, it's just a lot. You're juggling a lot of balls in the air. But again, unfortunately or fortunately, unless you have a leader that believes in that radical change is possible and success for poor kids or poor kids of color is possible, it won't matter. That is job number one.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that, Scott. Which of these would you say is the least effective? If you could say, actually, I would not even if you had $1 million or $100, I would spend on this last. Like, which of these would be the least effective?
I would say probably changing students, or, changing curricula, or things. First of all, on the students, in the United States, and I'm guessing it's similar in India, wealthier families typically live in one area, typically white, and send their kids to school, and sometimes to very expensive schools. Those schools are very successful, not because the kids are smarter, but because there's a culture that you're going to work hard, you're going to be successful, and the teachers, even if they're terrible, sort of fit into that culture. And so kids, learn. And again, unfortunately, the opposite is true in the schools that we work with. So changing the students, unless you're changing the entire thing, in which case, who cares? Because those kids are already doing fine. Rich kids are already, they're going to be okay. It doesn't matter. Kids are kids. And I think anyone who's here as a teacher knows that particularly the younger they are, they will change based on what's expected from them, and based upon the culture of their peers. That's the way they'll behave.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. In India, I think in our context, while we don't see segregation according to race, we do see very deep levels of socioeconomic segregation and other types of segregation. So
Right.
I think very much resonate with that. I got one final question, that I'm going to open this up to everybody here. Let's say you jumped on that privilege of wanting to come to India, and you said, we said, actually, Scott, come to India, but move to India. And, you're going to basically have a small portion of the Indian population. You've got to figure out how to turn around and change the lives of, let's say 15,000 kids in one of our small cities. And you had all the resources. You're a policymaker, right? What would you invest in? What would you put your efforts towards? What would you put your money towards?
Well, first of all, that would be awesome. I'd love that. So if anyone has that job, I'll come over and help you out. I think I would start with find, if it's how many schools you have. If it's 100 schools, you have to find the 100 leaders that are going to run those schools. And I'm not even sure they need a tremendous amount of experience in education. They need a tremendous amount of experience with poor children or the communities we serve, and they need tremendous amount of experience in managing grown-ups, adults. But I believe it's finding those folks and then training them, and creating a community where they believe it's possible, where they know they're going to build these management systems, and they're going to fail once, twice, 3 times, but eventually they'll figure it out. That is where I would start. The first thing would be how to create an adult culture that believes in kids, and what do I expect for great instruction. And I would start there, and I would spend the summer with them and inculcate them, so that belief is so strong, and then really anything's possible.
Yeah. Thank you for this. All right, folks. We're going to pause. I'm not going to ask any more questions. What we're going to do is we're going to play a bit of music. We're then going to basically cue in, the audience. Like, all of you would love to hear from you. Come on over to the chat box. Yeah. Like, I'm very curious. What are you sitting with? What are you taking away? Like, what's on your mind? Like, tell us in the chat box. And if you have a question, go ahead and ask that. I see a couple of questions here. We're going to basically let this run for about 5 minutes, right? Would love to hear from everybody over in the chat box over the next 5 minutes. And then we're going to basically come back to Scott with some questions from all of you that we take from the chat box. And we'll spend about 20, 30 minutes just trying to dig into some of those questions for our final segment of this call. So come on over to the chat box. Both tell us, like, one, what's a takeaway, what's an insight most sitting with you, and what's a question on your mind. Yeah. If we could play some music, and then we'll let this roll for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Sandeep, are you going to narrate the question? Right.
We see both some questions being coming over in the chat box as well as comments. Let's hear from everybody here if we can, folks. Yeah, so let's see if we can get 100 responses over in the chat box. Thanks, Meher. Thanks, Palak. Thank you, Ruhul, Aditya, Diksha. Seeing some really insightful questions. And thank you, Kajal and Ashita. Yeah, good question, Meher, as well. Do you exit schools after a few years? These are some. Keep them coming, folks. We'll keep them for another 2 minutes, but we'd love to hear from folks here. We've got some really insightful questions over in the chat box. We'll keep this rolling for a minute or two, and then we'll go back to some. Thank you all. See some questions around the learning of school, see some takeaways around, like really distinguishing the role of educators. And educators really have to basically be the real heroes, right? I love that. A lot of people saying about what it means to be a good teacher and belief, like a lot of that's resonating. Yeah, okay, let's jump in. I think we've got enough to be able to roll with. Actually, I'm going to start with our case question here because it's most recent, and then we'll work our way up. Like, what would you consider to be the 3 characteristics of a really great school leader?
Let me think about that for a moment.
Select 4.
Yeah. because we have a selection process. That's a whole nother conversation about how you select teachers and screen teachers, but we'll talk about that another time. Number one is obvious because we've been talking about it so much. This person needs to have in their heart
Belief, yeah.
just a ferocious belief in kids. And I just want to talk about that, what that I mean by that for a moment. In the United States, I don't know if this is the case of India, there's a whole oftentimes belief in kids or care about kids, particularly poor kids or poor kids of color, translates to caring or love. Listen, I am pro-love. We need to love our kids. Why else would you do this? But that's not what I believe. You know, loving, if you're a parent, you love your kids and you also expect the best of them, which means that you sometimes push them and you sometimes say, this is not okay. Like there's an expectation that you bring, not just a love and a care, which sometimes can get translated into lower expectations because the child has obstacles they need to overcome. So when I say belief that students can achieve and that it's possible, and that I am responsible and accountable for it as a leader, the sense of accountability. I'd say a flip side of that, which is a hard combination to find, is someone who's humble. Humble and open to feedback, wants feedback. Because as I'm sure on this call, there's lots of folks who will be way more successful than I was. But I got my butt kicked every day because it's just hard work. And one fails frequently. Maybe fail is not the right word, but doesn't achieve what one hopes to frequently, and has to pick yourself up and try it again and figure it out.
Yeah.
So the ability to be humble and take the feedback. I would say the other two things would be like someone who's smart and can like learn quickly and has the emotional intelligence to be able to work with grown-ups. Grown-ups kids are a piece of cake. Kids are easy, but grown-ups are, you know, we have egos and we have history and we have expectations. And as a leader, you have to be able to be with that person and see that person fully and be able to, at the same time, hold on to what you expect and where they need to be. That requires a degree of maturity. So it's not easy.
Yeah.
Can I say, Sandeep, the one thing that I did not mention is instructional expertise, like knowledge of curriculum. You can learn those things.
Yeah.
You know, those are important, so important, but you can learn those things. You need to choose the person who can take those things and fly.
Yeah. And if I have the humility, you know, I'm willing to basically accept feedback. I'm a fast learner. Like I'm somebody that's smart and can learn fast. I basically come in with strong levels of belief, but I also come in willing to hold kids to high expectations and believing that kids need to be held to high expectations. Actually, pretty much everything else, like I can put together. And I know earlier you said, actually, like, I don't need a tremendous amount of experience, but I need like experience working with kids from low income backgrounds, because that's actually going to come in and help me to be able to run from there. And I need experience actually having like worked with adults so that I can come in and transfer that across contexts, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we have another question here, which is, you know, about like whether you exit schools after a few years, or do you stay on actually running them once you've taken them over? So is there a process where you take a school over, like get it good and then turn it back over, or does Mastery continue to run them?
Yeah, that we don't do that. We typically, not typically, in every case, continue to run them.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question whether you could turn the system back to the, you know, the government-run system. My guess is that it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Again, because culture, you know, drives behavior, and if you don't have the culture that believes in kids and you don't have the culture that allows these management systems to work, then they become empty. And you will slide quickly back to where things were before.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Thanks for that. We have another question, which is, school is a dynamic concept. I think this is coming from Shruti, right? School is a dynamic, it's moving, it's changing a lot, right? And like, how do you sustain quality in a system that is changing so frequently and that is so complex? Like, how do you keep quality sustained? I have a feeling your answer is probably going to be embedded in some of those systems, but yeah, I would love to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. One bit of advice I would get, and I want to be some humility here that I'm not sure it's relevant for India. So I'll just share in the United States. In the United States, there is always something new, urgent to distract the leader. So whether that's this year, technology-based curriculum is what's going to change schools. And last year it was project-based instruction. That's going to change schools. And next year will be social emotional learning. That's going to change schools. And next year it's going to be something else. It's going to be really anchoring in, really deeply understanding the racism that exists in our culture. Again, all great things. And my advice to a leader is ignore it all, because you'll go crazy. And in my experience, to do anything well means you're going to fail at least twice before you get it right.
Yeah.
So you need to keep working at a limited number of things. If you choose a technology-based curriculum, awesome. I'm sure that can work. And if you choose a non-technology-based curriculum, some other way, direct instruction, great. I'm sure it can work. And to get it to work will take you 3 to 5 years before you are clear. This is what I expect to make this way of teaching work, where you're training people and so on. So the answer to how to deal with things constantly changing is whatever you can do to limit that change and focus on the 3 things you think are most important. And hopefully have a community that similarly believes those 3 things. Do that. I was a principal. And so I was focused completely on the things that I believe. But as the CEO, and maybe some folks are near, my job was to make sure my principals only heard 3 things, because there were politics and money and buildings and all kinds of things that it was my job to protect them from engaging in, so that they could do their work. And I don't know if that's relevant in your institutions, but that's a big lesson learned. And that the only thing they're hearing from you is your mission, your values, celebrating the successes, and being honest about what's not working, just being transparent. And everything else you're trying to keep away.
Yeah. Yeah. So much wisdom in that. And I love that. And maybe as a follow-up to that, what were your 3 biggest priorities? This is building off of another question from the chat box, but when you were a school leader, I'm going to alter this question slightly. What were your 3 biggest priorities? And
yeah, they did change a little bit over time. When we first take over a building, I would say we're probably focused on 3 things. We're focused on belief systems of the leader and the staff. So there's a lot of focus on that, obviously. We're focused on behavior. Again, I'm not sure this is relevant to your context, but in the United States, the lowest performing schools are often chaotic, violent sometimes. Students are misbehaving a lot. And so creating a culture and a discipline system, being completely consistent with that culture, and both being consistent about behavior and pumping up, building a community based on love and trust, is job number 1. I'd say the third thing is, besides culture of the adults and behavior, is we have a lot of students with disabilities who are not getting what they need. And so they're misbehaving, whether it's because they can't read and they're frustrated or there's emotional disabilities. So in our context, having systems to address that. That changes once the school is stable. And then the focus is instruction, instruction, instruction. Like everything is instruction, and you're anchoring instruction in the data. And you are, as a school leader, I'm walking into classrooms all the time. I'm giving the teacher feedback. I'm having teachers talk to teachers about instruction. And we're trying to create a culture where we're all trying to be master craftsmen, where we're trying to all become the best teacher we can be. Taking videos of each other, all those kind of things, but anchored in what happens in the classroom. We're not bringing in speakers to talk about big themes. We're talking about, how did you open your classroom? What was the first 5 minutes like? What did you do? Teacher A, share what you did the first class. Let's take a video of that and share what you did. How did you redirect this student? Like that kind of detail, because we're all working on the same craft.
Yeah. And there's really an ability to be able to basically make the details beautiful, and like you're building excitement around like the everyday and around the details instead of actually trying to bring in excitement from the outside. Folks, we're going to.
Sandeep, can I just double click on what you?
Yeah.
If you as a leader are able to bring that, I mean, teaching and school, like it is the most amazing profession. Like you get to see kids change and learn. Like there's real excitement and love and energy there. And so part of the role of the leader is to be, I'll use an expression in the United States, like a hard ass. You are like focused on details and giving feedback. And your whole demeanor is like, this is what I expect. At the same time, there's excitement and love because it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're able to do that, kind of like if you believe adults will believe, if adults believe kids will believe, like it's the same. If you actually bring an excitement for the details, adults will bring and follow through with a similar level of excitement. I'm going to hold space for 2 more questions, and then we're gonna go back to the audience, get some reactions, and bring this to a close. We have a question from Vijay, which is, what's the role that context plays? And, how much do you actually lean into the context of the community and the school, and how much is actually transferable across contexts in your experience as well?
Yeah.
And I know because you don't understand the Indian context. So let me just say, like, if you were to go from Philadelphia to Newark, right? Like if you were to go to a different city as well, like what would that be as well? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. First, I want to, be humble that I don't know the Indian context. So I could be way off here. So I'll just share my context. Most of the students we serve are Black or Latino, and then some immigrants. And I would say context matters tremendously. Every child and family arrives at your school with a history, with their own culture, with their own frame of reference. But what is common that you can build upon is every culture has their belief in their children and a belief for wanting things better for their children and a history of struggle and resiliency. Like there's not a culture that doesn't have that, as well as beautiful things, music and art and food and things like that. That is power. If you can tap into the culture of your families and celebrate that, whether in our context, it's the struggle for Black people in America to have civil rights, to break through a legacy of slavery and racism and persevere. Like there's a beautiful culture there that we can name and build upon, which makes your school feel like the families feel like this is my school. This is where I belong. So I think it's appropriate, and I'm not sure this was the question, so I'll stop, but I think it's appropriate to identify, live and celebrate your context. Everything that I said before is still common. You still have to create a culture of achievement. You still have for the kids and for the adults. You still need management systems. You still need feedback. And you can celebrate who your community is and bring your community together. Again, to me, that's like one of the beautiful things about running a school is it's a community, and you can create bonds between parents to help each other. That your school becomes something very special.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to close this off with one last question, and then we're going to bring this to a close. And this is from Sajal. You know, we're talking a lot about the workforce is changing, the world is changing, right? Like the economy is changing, right? And we're seeing that across. And what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you think learning and school need to evolve to be able to keep up with this rapidly changing world?
Well, first, I noted that some folks on the call are from Teach for India or other similar nonprofits. And I just want to say thank you. Like, hooray for you and the community you're beginning to build in India and the work you're doing, Sandeep. Because the world is changing. And this is just my opinion. All those things are changing, matters this much. And the change that you're beginning to create by creating a community of educators who are trying to change the system matters like this much. Like, I don't want to make pretend that AI or computer systems like don't make a huge difference or aren't important. They are important.
Yeah.
And I imagine if we go back 30 years or 40 years and you talk to an educator, they would say everything's changing. The world is changing. I don't know. Like, to me, the things we talked about, belief in kids, instruction, however that's being applied, project-based, traditional, direct instruction, technology, is still has the same commonalities. You need a relationship with your children. You need a structure. You need like an outcome you're going toward. You need a flow to your like. I would just encourage folks, and I know there's a whole world and industry and lots of people making money talking about how the world's changing and how we should adapt to the change. Ignore it a little bit and focus on what's in front of you.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much wisdom, but also so much like first principles in this, right? Like, how do you actually just cut to the chase and actually say what's at the heart of this, which is relationships and you know what we believe kids need, and actually just getting instruction right. And there's truth to that, you know, like there is like, even amidst like this rapidly evolving world, like there are some things that actually just stay fundamental. And actually there's power in just basically strengthening those fundamentals and believing that those fundamentals can like actually just get you to do really good things for kids across context, right? Whether you're in, you know, Philly, Philadelphia, or whether you're in Mumbai, India, or whether you're in New York, like some of those fundamentals actually will still serve true, regardless of where you are, and actually regardless of the time that you're in as well. And there's a lot of wisdom in saying harness and focus on those fundamentals. All right, folks. Scott, this has been a insightful end to my day, at least, and I think we can say the same for everybody here as well. This has been inspiring. This has been filled with wisdom. This has actually been what you would expect from someone like yourself that's been at this for 22 years, trying to change the lives of kids. So much gratitude for coming on to this call, for sharing that with us, for coming on this call with excitement, but also just for having done the work for 22 years. I think we're all leaving a little bit more filled in both our hearts and our heads because of it. So thank you.
Sandeep, I just want to say it's been a real pleasure. I'm so, just for the folks on the call, when I first got contacted by Sandeep, I had no idea what Circle India was or who was involved, or the profound like challenge and change that you're making. And I was just thrilled. I feel like compañeros, like we're all in the same common cause. And I want to just say, I'm excited for you, wish you luck. If I can be helpful at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and keep going.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
Step 2 is to make this next conversation in person.
Okay. Invite me, I'll come. All
I
right.
love that. Yeah, thank you, Scott.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, Sandeep. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining. There's a feedback form link. It'd be great if you can fill it out, and have a great rest of the evening. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.